I'm Bill Auten of Auten Claims Management.
I'm Chantal Roberts of CMR Consulting, and welcome to the Art of Adjusting podcast.
Today, we're going to talk about life as an insurance adjuster from the perspective of property, auto, liability, or workers' compensation adjusters. Our goal is to bring interesting topics in the world of claims adjusting to people who are working as an adjuster now and to people who are considering a career as a claims adjuster.
Hey, Sandy, how are you doing?
I am good. How was your fourth?
It was great. I had a very relaxing fourth. The dog did not like it, unfortunately, very scared
Yeah.
of the loud noises and everything. But yeah, had a great one. You?
Good. Yeah, same thing. Fireworks are, they're not permitted in my area, but that never seems to stop any of my neighbors. So if I want to see a show, I just open the window and there it is.
Yeah, it's the same here. It's the same here. Yeah, like we're not allowed to have those fireworks or anything like that, but yet you can hear the kids shooting them off and
Yeah,
everything. So, yeah, whatever. There you go.
there you go.
So, we're going to have a great conversation, and it's something that Bill and I have talked about a little bit, but I don't think we've ever really taken given like really kind of concrete advice on it. And it's how to have these really tough conversations. And this was actually something that you had brought up, and I'm like, yes. So we're going to be talking about kind of like some of the things you can say, both as an adjuster or as a risk manager or an agent or whatever, when we get ready to have those tough conversations. And so yeah, there we go. That's that's it. Okay, great. Good conversation. We're gonna head on out now.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for, adding this to the list for the podcast episodes to kind of touch on this subject because I think a lot of us unfortunately learned the hard way, right? Like we have a conversation that went poorly, or we put our foot in our mouth, or something happened, and we're like, oh, okay, won't do that again. And it shouldn't have to be that way. And I think a lot of adjusters, especially because sometimes you have to deliver news that is not great. And sometimes you have to deliver news to somebody who they're emotional or they're angry. And no one teaches you really how to have those conversations, especially in in the higher stakes environment of claims. I think a lot of people have what we would consider like customer service experience, where you earn retail. A lot of us have had retail or food service jobs when we're younger, and you learn kind of customer service interactions that way, where somebody's upset about their order being wrong or something along those lines. Like we've all had those experiences, but it's very different when someone has had like a loss, there's damage to their home, their vehicle, and something isn't covered. That's significantly higher stakes than, your cheeseburger had onions on it and you don't want onions. So people are going to be much more upset, and no one really walks adjusters through how to handle this.
Yeah.
And we kind of and I what I see a lot when I would see a lot in training is you would have people again because there's really no training provided. They're going to have a hard conversation, and so they procrastinate.
Yes, which is the
And they
worst thing you can do. Absolutely the worst thing you can do by far. I totally agree with you.
yeah, they wait until like the last possible moment that they have to call the insured or the claimant, whoever they have to deliver the news to deliver that news, and it just makes it so much worse because that person had to wait all that time, right?
Mhm.
So
And I think the thing is too is that the longer you have your person being the insured or even the third party claimant wait for that bad news, it gets to be worse because there is this idea that you are, as the adjuster, you have superior knowledge and you are leading these people down the garden rose path, thinking that, so they think that there is coverage.
mhm.
And so they're doing all of these things thinking that they're going to get reimbursed when in fact you know that there's not. And there have been some questions like, are we waiving the rights of the insurer for these defenses? And that's why having these conversations are really, really important. And I do think part of the issue is A, it's soft skills. Nobody teaches soft skills anymore. And then B, we're all working from home. So
Mhm.
when I was learning how to have these hard conversations, I was sitting in a pod with three more senior adjusters. So I could listen to how they worded things. And we just don't have that anymore.
And I think we really haven't adapted to that because same. I started my career in a cubicle world, and you did listen to conversations going around you, and you learned that way. But there's no, and maybe there are other carriers who are doing this, but we can do the same thing in like a Teams environment where you just have somebody listening on a call. And I mean, if you're listening to the podcast, please drop it in the comments and let us know if you have stories of how this is happening in your organization. But there should be, if not recorded calls, calls where the team listens in so that they can learn from that experience, because then you get to hear both sides, right? You get to
Yeah.
hear the adjuster and the claimant. I remember early in my career, I had the only time we had training on communication. It was the first carrier that I worked for, and what they did is they had us all in a conference room, and they would have us role play. And so
Yeah.
you have one adjuster be the adjuster and one
Hmm.
adjuster be the claimant. And
Hmm.
then you'd have them in chairs facing away from each other and like pretend to have a phone call. And the adjusters playing the claimant had a blast with like
Oh
all
yeah.
the, I'm going to tell you all the worst things I've ever heard in
Oh
my
yeah,
life.
yeah, yeah. I was going to bring this up, and anytime I say the word role play, everybody like rolls their eyes, and I'm like, listen, guys, I did this when I was at Liberty Mutual, and I don't know if it was just because I was fearless or whatever. I mean, I was still a baby adjuster, but management somehow recognized that there's a woman right there who can help us out. And they would have the newer adjusters call me, and I would be the insured, and I would deliberately be rude. And I do feel bad about this. I tell this story often. I accidentally made one adjuster cry, and I did not mean to.
Oh no.
Yeah, I did not mean to. But the thinking is, if you have quote unquote the worst kind of phone call where people are yelling at you or refusing to give you information or whatever in that role playing thing, then the real call is pretty much going to be a cakewalk.
Yeah.
They would do recorded statements of me or whatever. I would refuse to give driver's license number, social security numbers. I would deliberately go off on a tangent somewhere. Yeah, I would do all of the things, just like what you were talking about. And then I would start yelling at them when they would say, okay, now I'm thinking that there's no coverage
Yeah.
here, but and what do you mean, blah? And it was never as bad as all of that because we build it up in our minds because again, we're not used to having that. And that I love this idea. We need to do it.
Yeah, it really should be happening in more places because you're right. It prepares you, and the adjusters who get to wear the hat of the insured or the claimant, they have fun because then they get to give you all these different scenarios. But then in a class environment, you also get to hear like, oh, I hadn't thought of saying it that way, or you hear a phrase that's really great, and you're like, oh, I'm going to put that in my pocket and use that later if this comes up. So it really is beneficial. But again, most that's rare. That's rare to kind of have that kind of
Right.
training to prepare adjusters, and usually they just learn by doing,
Mhm.
or worse, they never learn.
Right.
And then you have like a very upset insureds and claimants on the other end of those calls.
Because one of the things that I talked about in my book, The Art of Adjusting, is a lot of times when the insured and the claimant are upset, it's because the emotion fear and the emotion uh, anger are very, very close,
Hmm.
very close together. I mean, like a hair's breadth apart. And the insured, the third party claimant, whomever, they're scared. Point
Yeah.
blank scare. Are you going to pay for this? Am I going to have to pay for this out of my own pocket? What's going on? I've lost my house. Where do I go to re-get or rebuy all of my stuff? Do you know how much stuff costs nowadays? And saying these empty platitudes like, "Oh, I understand how you feel." No, you don't. Did your house burn down? Did
Mhm.
your car? get crashed? Did you lose a loved one in a car accident? No, you do not understand how I feel. So it's being able to empathize with them without patronizing them and knowing what to say, when to say it, and how to say it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because a lot of people will kind of default to the I understand how you feel. And even if you have, let's say you have gone through something similar, you never want to use that as a response
No, no.
because you don't know how they're feeling. And to them, it feels minimizing. To them, it
Yes.
feels minimizing. And it's important to like you can empathize with the situation and still validate how they're feeling without agreeing with what they're feeling, right? Or their account of the events, right? So
Right?
if they're in the anger stage and they're upset at you, and you know that you can listen and let them know, I can tell you're really upset about this. It
Yes.
makes sense that I would be upset too. That's a different thing than saying, I understand how you feel. So
Right.
the language really, really does matter just to let them vent and
Mhm.
then also being able to be comfortable with pauses. So I see this a
Yes.
lot with adjusters where they're speaking and then they stop for a second and then the adjuster jumps in with like
Yes.
the next thing.
Yes. One of my go-to techniques, and it's no surprise because we've talked about this before, how Bill and I will have notes or whatever to talk about. Oh, let's make sure we mention this one thing. But one of the things that, again, that I talk about in the art of adjusting is when a claimant, first, third party, whatever, is mad, shut up.
Yeah.
Shut up. And I actually wrote, I said, it's actually one of my favorite things to do. And it sounds mean, but what I am doing is I am letting that person vent. Because remember, again, they could be angry or they could be scared. I
Mhm.
don't really know, but I've got to let this festering get out, and so I just sit there and I type in everything that they're saying in my claim notes, and eventually they will stop and take a breath because I haven't even said uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. I am silent, okay? And eventually they will take a breath and they will go, "Are you there?" And what I do, and this is an excellent technique, it's a psychological technique, is you just lower your voice and you say, "Yes, I'm here. I'm listening. I'm writing down what you say.
Mhm.
Continue." And they don't know what to do with that because they're so used to people coming back at them, like you say, like, "Oh, well, I'm going to tell you this, and oh, I'm going to tell you that," and da, da, da. No, you let them vent. Please continue. Well, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. Anything more? When they get finished, you keep asking anything more, anything more, anything more. Just keep telling me, keep telling me, keep telling me. And then you can go, "Okay, this is what I've got. I want to make sure that I've got you down correctly. And then you kind of read your notes to them. You're upset about this, you da da da, blah, blah, blah. You want this, you want that, da 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 da. Okay, are you ready? I would like to respond to these points." And sometimes that works. Sometimes they will be quiet. And sometimes, and I've had this happen to me when I do the very first point, like, "You're upset that water damage isn't covered." Well, I've sent you the reservation of rights letter. I'm going to send you the declination of coverage letter. And they just start going off again, being mad. Shut
Mhm.
up. Again, shut up. And if it gets to be the point to where you can't get in a word edgewise, what I would say is your next point would be tip number one is like, let's schedule a dedicated time for us to talk about this when we can talk. Because
Yeah.
I've got all your notes, you've got all my letters. Let's plan on 15, 30 minutes tomorrow or Wednesday or whatever. Schedule that dedicated time. to talk with them and overschedule, like, plan an hour. If, but that is going to be one of my number one tips for anybody right there. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I like that because it also tells them you're not trying to get rid of them,
Mm.
right? If they're upset, it tells them I still want to talk to you about this, but I want to give you time to think about, what we're going to discuss. And one of the things that I used to use as I would, to your point of scheduling more than you tell them, schedule like an hour for yourself. And then
Mhm.
at the 30-minute mark when they're still going, tell them, give me one moment. I have a meeting after this, but I want to cancel it because I want to make sure I spend time with you. And
Yeah.
you don't even have to have a meeting to cancel, by the way, but it gives them the message of you're important right now.
I'm
And
listening to you.
yes,
I
yes.
am listening to you. Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes a difference because that's really what they need to know. They need to know that you're listening. So I would at least tell them, "You're my focus." It's again,
Right.
it's setting that expectation. We talked about this at the last episode
Yeah.
of the expectation settings. There's this book called. It's not even about insurance, but it shapes how I look at customer service. It's called Why Men Rebel, and it's about rebellions. But essentially, there's like a little graph, and it tells you you have your expectations and your capabilities. And as long as those two things are the same, you're good. It's when the gap occurs
Mm,
that people get frustrated. And then
mm.
what happens when that frustration isn't checked? So I think of customer service that way too, that you never want those expectations to be higher than your capabilities. Always make sure that those are aligned. And if you don't communicate that, then people are going to like they get upset. That's where a lot of the miscommunication, all of that occurs, and then people get angry.
And again, going back to the scheduled, the dedicated time, when you, as an adjuster, are making that very first phone call, that first contact, even if you have to text them and go, I need to talk to you for 15 minutes to
Mhm.
explain the claims process, this is where we're going to be setting up these expectations. And you got to remember these commercials that people are seeing, say 15% or more or whatever. I mean, they just think that people are getting checks left and right.
Yeah.
And that is not necessarily the case. So again, we're setting these expectations. And one of the things that I would recommend that we do is like my number two tip, I guess, is in addition to shutting up, um, but also have your documents ready. And maybe have already sent it over to the claimant, first or third party. Like if you will see on page 2 of the estimate, blah 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 blah, or whatever. At least you have your policy pulled up, your photos, estimates, notes, whatever you need so that you're able to speak with some kind of authority when you are able to speak. Because again, we want them to feel heard. And that's the very first thing I would say as to having that tough conversation.
Yeah. And it's really getting adjusters too comfortable with what they feel is awkward.
Yes.
So it's silence is one of them. A lot of people don't feel
Yes.
comfortable with silence, so they feel like they got to fill it in. And the other one is when someone's crying. And if
Yes.
someone is like, let them go through their feelings, let them speak to you. It's going to take them more time. But once we had an adjuster where she came to me and she was like, she was a baby adjuster, brand new.
Mm.
And she told me, like, the claimant started crying and I panicked and I hung up and I needed to hear back. But I just want to let you know because she's probably going to call you angry right now. And I was like, oh my God.
Oh, bless
Sure
her.
enough,
Oh, bless her.
they called me angry, but she panicked.
Oh,
And
sure.
it really spoke, and that's why I went to like our claims director and I said, like, we need to train, we need to train these adjusters. But if you've never been in that situation before, right? You have somebody who's fresh out of college, they're now in the claims desk, you train them, and they've never had an experience where somebody is crying over a loss that impacts their life.
Right. Right.
And it's for someone who's never had an experience like that. For the adjusters, it's very scary your first time you had that if you've never been prepared. But I just thought, it really is something that we learn on the job. And it's a disservice to our adjusters to not prepare them for that, to not get them comfortable with things that they may have previously considered awkward and uncomfortable, because then that leads to avoidance too. It's back
Yes.
to that not wanting to call the claimant, waiting until the last minute because you don't want to have those conversations.
It's funny. I have for Wednesday wisdom for my LinkedIn post this week, a actually it's not a, it's the only thank you letter I have ever received as an adjuster.
Mm.
I mean, like, adjusters don't get thank you letters. Thank you for denying my claim. I really appreciated it. And we just don't get that. This letter was dated from May 2006, and it was after Hurricane Katrina. And what this insured said was how she actually appreciated the fact that I didn't dance around concepts or ideas or what was going to happen next. We were in the middle of one of the biggest hurricanes that had ever happened, and we just didn't have the manpower. I think the whole industry was caught flat-footed by Katrina. And
Mm.
even though this insured happened to be in Mississippi, she lost both of her businesses. Just the tidal wave knocked them down. And I just said, okay, look, here's the deal. I mean, I got some guys out there in Mississippi that I like. But as well as I do, all of your neighbors are gone. So those guys have been hired by everybody else. It's probably going to take 3 weeks for them to even get to you.
Mhm.
That is not normal, but this is what we are dealing with. And being this honest and open, upfront kind of deal, she actually wrote me a letter saying, I appreciate the fact that you didn't dance around. You told me what was going to be the bad parts. You told me what was not going to be paid right then and there. My friends and she wrote this. She goes, my friends and family actually laughed at me when I said, I thought you were a good person.
Mm.
Because it is so rare for adjusters to be upfront and honest. But you know what, guys? This is what I say. We have licenses in most states. We are white collar professionals. We have licenses. We need to act like professionals, just like doctors and lawyers and all of that. We need to be having these upfront conversations up front,
Mhm.
and set those expectations over and over and over and over and over again every single time you call.
Yeah. And it's important for adjusters to remember when people are angry, right? You're the messenger. You're the messenger. They're going
Mhm.
to express that anger to you,
Mhm.
but they're angry with the situation. There's sometimes anger around just the unfairness of life.
Right.
Why did this happen to them? How all the downstream impacts of that loss in all of the other ways that it affects them that are not insurable, right? They're
Right.
upset at that, but you're the person that they're communicating with. So
Yeah.
remember not to take that personally. And sometimes you'll kind of be lumped in together with the concept of like, oh, and insurance and you
Yes.
guys don't want to pay. Like I'm always the part of you guys. You guys don't want to pay my claim. You guys don't want to, provide me coverage. And and again, when they're in that state, when they're upset, let them speak. That's not rebuttal time. That's not rebuttal
It
time.
is not rebuttal time. Very good. Not rebuttal.
Not
Shut
rebuttal.
up. Just shut
Yes.
up. If you take one thing away from this podcast, shut up. That's what this
Yeah.
podcast is going to be called today. Shut up.
Yeah. But a lot of that really is, and I think it comes from when you're on the receiving end of this and you've never been trained. It feels personal. It feels personal because you're the adjuster, you're trying to do your job, and they're now lumping you in with you guys,
Mm.
and they're telling you all these awful things. You don't care about them, and you're heartless, and because the policyholder didn't read exclusions. But you have to know that that's not about you.
Right.
It's not about you. So it's just important to remember that. So maybe that's two things to print out and put in your office. It's not about you, and shut up.
It's
That'll
not
get you
about
through a
you and
lot of
shut up.
awkward conversation.
Uh, I would also say another tip while we're talking about it's not about you is to go ahead and anticipate those objections that they are going to say when you're shutting up, But this is part of your prep work to do, if they ask about the ensuing loss of this water damage, how the pipe is not going to be covered, but the ensuing loss is, here's going to be my answer, or here's how I'm going to talk about that. And then, of course, you can always talk with your team leader or whatever and run through that role play and making sure that you are using the correct language. And one of the things I always loved to do when I know I'm getting ready to have that tough conversation, in addition to setting aside that time, is I tell the person that I'm going to be talking to, listen, I'm going to need you to have a pen and paper because I am going to throw a whole bunch of information at you.
Mhm.
And there's no way you're going to be able to sort it all through or remember anything. Good news is that I'm also going to send you a letter, so you don't really have to remember it because I'm going to send you a letter. You can read it and then you can call me back and we can talk about it again. But right now, I want you to have a piece of paper and a pencil. And I usually do this when I'm explaining settlement figures.
Mm.
Like, okay, so the RCV is $1,000. You have a $5 deductible. You have, recoverable depreciation, which means you're going to get it back once you fix it and you send me the receipt showing me that that's $10. And so your actual cash value, the amount that I'm going to make payable to you and the lien holder of your house is, $950 or whatever. And um, then I'm gonna send you the estimate, I'm gonna send you the proof of loss and blah 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 and da 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 da. Or and this is I think a very big deal. Uh, we're hearing a lot about how in Florida there were these independent appraisers out there who wrote up an estimate and then the desk adjuster had taken off like I don't know what 90% of it of their estimate. And so the insured would have this estimate that says, yes, your damage is $70,000, and they're getting a check from the insurance company that is for $4,000. And they're like, wait, this, I can't fix my house for $4,000 if the damage is 70. That's again when you're going to have to get a pen and paper. Okay, look,
Mhm.
your whole damage is $70,000. However, we don't pay for mold remediation. So I'm going to take off, $10,000 right there. To be sure, you need it, but your policy doesn't cover it. I'm going to send you a letter explaining that, showing you the math, how I took that off, because we've got to be transparent with these people too.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the letter is so important because people need a visual,
Yes,
especially if we're talking about numbers. Like they need the visual. They need to be able to kind of walk through it. And then it helps to have everything in black and white because otherwise you get into the oh well my neighbor had a loss and my neighbor got X amount. Like you'll hear a lot, my brother had a loss and he got this amount. And trying to explain to them, I have no idea what happened with that loss, what carrier they had, but it's important to have that documentation in front of them and then speak to them afterwards. I think the biggest the thing as an adjuster that it took me a while to learn was you're going to send a lot of letters, you send a lot of documentation,
yeah,
they're not reading it. You you have to call them and make sure they understand it. Like they glance over it, but and we talked about this at the last episode too.
yeah,
A lot of the language in those documents is mandated by Department of Insurance and it's not user friendly at all and it's a lot of jargon.
yes,
So it's important to make sure that you speak to them, you walk them through it so that they understand, especially when it comes to the appeal process. So
yes.
if they are upset at the outcome, there's an appeal process in every state for multiple lines. And you can say, if here's the appeal process for this, if you'd like to challenge it, if they start accusing you of, whatever, that let them
Right.
know about, Department of Insurance or however they report it, if they, if they feel that they're not being treated fairly, what their recourse is. So again, back to your point that we're transparent, but it also focuses on the process. You always kind of want to redirect them to the process. And sometimes that de-escalates them too, because now they're focused more on not so much the feelings, but what are my next steps and what do I do?
I think that's a great thing is focusing on the process because I think we were talking about when our claimants get emotional and they start crying and we want to give them space, of course, shut up, which is one of our themes for today. And you had these really great words like, I can hear that this is very upsetting. Offer to take a break. Like, hey, I can hear that this is upsetting. Uh, why don't we reconvene in 2 hours or tomorrow or whatever? And as you have repeatedly said, don't feel the need to keep the silence. But one of the things, as we're focusing back on the process, is you can say, I can tell that this is really upsetting you, but I want to make sure that you have all of the information you need when you are ready.
Mhm.
Because again, and it's scary for adjusters, and I don't want to use this generational thing like, oh, millennials don't want to talk to anybody and Gen Z doesn't want to talk to anybody. It's true, we don't. I mean, heck, I'm Gen X. I don't want to talk to anybody either, but it does become a little uncomfortable when we're having these conversations, and the focus needs to be on the person we are talking to.
Mhm. Yeah, it's just important for people to know that they're heard, right? I think that that's 90% of it is they're frustrated because, perhaps they weren't aware of what was involved in the coverage or what the exclusions were or what the conditions were for reporting. And they feel that there was already that lack of communication because they didn't know. So, as the adjuster, and it shouldn't be this way, but it is this way, you do have to do that heavier lifting once the loss is filed so that they do know at least they're being heard now.
Yes. Yeah. And it's not always butterflies and rainbows, I'm gonna say. You know, I I like to scare my little students sometimes, especially when they're just starting out in insurance. And I'm like, okay, so all y'all been in insurance for about a year. How many of you have received death threats so far? And they're just like all saucer-eyed and everything. And I'm like, geez, I maybe have gotten three at least. I know my husband is an adjuster as well. He was told that he better bring a gun because this ain't going to be a knife fight.
Mhm.
My dad is an adjuster. He has had to have the sheriff escort him onto the insured's property. Now, remember, the insured has a duty to cooperate, right? But this insured was pretty upset and said, you come on my property, it's not going to work out well for you. So dad said, okay, I'm going to get the sheriff and I'm going to do my job. So when the policyholder or the claimant makes that threat, again, it's the same thing that you were talking about earlier is they're scared, they're
Mhm.
upset, we don't know, but let's stay professional and not take it personally. And it's really hard not to take it personally when someone says, I'm gonna beat you to a pulp if you show up here. It's hard not to take that personally.
Yeah. And it's important to understand what the protocol is for your organization when that happens,
Right.
right? Because, way back when, everything wasn't centralized the way it is today. So when your letters went out, had the address for your office, somebody knew where to find you if they needed to. And so you had a protocol for your office. I remember we had a couple of those where there was a threat, we had to kind of lock it down, advise security, advise law enforcement. But now that things are centralized, it may have your, headquarter address. You still want to let headquarters know because that may be where the threat really is physically because that's what's on the documentation. So for your organization, if you don't know what that process is, that's time to reach out to your leadership and say, what is the process for this? Because everyone should know what to do if they have a threat like that.
Yeah.
how to report it, how to make sure other people know so that everybody can be safe, so that if something escalates, they know how to make sure that the rest of the staff that are at that location are safe.
And listen, guys, you also need to record that in our claim file. You know, insured made a verbal threat to physically harm me. You don't have to say the insured called me an SOB and MF and blah blah. I mean, you don't have to quote all of what was said, but you do need to memorialize that conversation that it's gotten a little bit ugly.
Mhm.
And when the insured says, "Oh, I'm gonna, talk about you on TikTok or whatever," and I'll be like, "Yeah, that is at KCM Roberts.
Yeah.
So if you could just, tag me, I would really appreciate that. It'd be great. Thanks. I'd get more, viewers and followers that way." No, you go, you know what? You are absolutely within your rights to get an attorney, to make a Department of Insurance complaint, to contact the media. You are absolutely within your rights to do that, and you of course put that in the file, and for your next phone call will be to your supervisor. "Hey, by the way, so and so on such and such file is threatening this and this, and you might need to bump that up the chain, boss."
Mhm.
you know
But those are all good things to make sure adjusters know how to handle those,
yes.
right? And I like I don't was never formally trained on that. It was just
No.
something that it happens and then you learn from that experience.
And it is a horribly frightening experience. I won't say that it's less frightening for a man than it is for a woman to be threatened physically. I can tell you that I was very, very scared. And
Mm,
again, I was working at this particular point when we were in offices, and I would have a man walk me to my car at
mhm,
the end of the day for at least a week, because I was worried about that. You need to know, as the adjuster, you need to be able to draw your boundaries. And even though I'm sitting here saying, "Oh, well, it's not really personal," it is totally personal. Especially if it becomes abusive. You need to draw that boundary and say, "I am sorry. I'm here to help you understand what the process is, but I can't do that if threats continue."
mhm.
And again, you draw that boundary. And if they keep on going, again, shut up. This is
Yeah.
this is your default mode. Shut up. And then when they stop, again, "I'm here to help you." "Oh, you're not helping me, blah, blah, blah." Shut up. Again, I'm here to help you, but I can't do that if we're going to be speaking in this manner. And listen, I have never known, well, I know of one insurer that does not let you hang up on your insured or a claimant if they are being abusive. But
Mhm.
I always encouraged when I was a claims manager, I'm like, "Look, if they're being ugly to you," of course, we're in the South, and Mama don't let you be ugly to people.
Yeah.
You say, "I am sorry," and you use again your lower tone of voice, your softer tone of voice. Don't yell at them. Don't scream at them. Don't try to talk over them. Talk through them. Okay? Because I'm not going to wait till they shut up. In this particular instance, if they're threatening me with bodily harm, I'm going to
Mhm.
say, "I am sorry. I cannot continue this conversation at this time. And I am not going to be able to continue a conversation with you until we are able to speak in a more professional or business-like tone." I say that twice. "I am not going to be able to speak to you until we're able to speak in a more professional and business-like tone." I say that twice. On the third time, I go, "I am currently going to hang up the phone now.
Mhm.
I will send you a letter recapping our conversation, and we will go on from there. If we need to communicate in a written format, then that's what we need to do." And I hang up the phone, and then again, I escalate it to the manager. Even if I was a claims manager, I'd go to the like VP or the assistant claims manager. Hey, you know what? They're going to want my boss. You're going to get to be my boss. The assistant claim manager gets to be my boss today. Have fun with that one. But yeah, you need to know your escalation path and document it in your files.
Yeah. Which, and it's crazy to me to just have a blanket policy of you can't hang up on an insured, because you do have scenarios where people are aggressive and insulting and inappropriate, or just sometimes vulgar, like they're just vulgar for the sake of being vulgar, and they're not even angry, they're just, but they know, you have
Right.
some people who know that you can't hang up or that they have control over you because they're the client. But for any organization, please, like, don't create this kind of blanket you can never hang up, because I know people at call centers
Yeah.
who they have to listen to those calls because they're afraid of, if they hang up they get dinged, like it
Hmm.
marks
Hmm.
against them. And like, don't force your people to do that.
Yeah.
Have a pathway for them.
Well, this one we'll talk offline. I'll tell you who it is.
Okay.
And I understand why they have done this particular insurer has done it, but yeah, I totally agree. Um, it's different. It's very different, but they've got a different mentality. So
Mhm.
anyway, so we've been given a lot of good techniques. And one of the things that I did want to make sure that we mentioned is that when we're talking to people, because you're right, they don't read our letters, they don't, read our emails. And this is something that I'm constantly concerned with is putting everything in an email because we all know we don't read our boss's emails.
Mhm.
I'm not necessarily sure my husband reads my emails to him. So, that's why I'm such a big proponent of putting things in a letter. To be sure, you can email it, but make it an attachment, because it makes it a little bit more formal. And then I would snail mail it still, because that's when people pay attention.
Mhm.
And you need to make sure that you put this information that you are giving people in chunks because we just can't, as human beings, process a whole bunch of information all at the same time. So when you're talking to someone, again, having that tough conversation, okay, let's first talk about this burst pipe, which is not going to be covered and let me tell you why. And then we're going to go, so you kind of start by clarifying the process and using chunks of language or chunks of information.
Yeah, I think it's important to make sure it's not everything all at once, because
Yeah.
that's overwhelming
Yeah.
to the caller. But it's important. I always tell adjusters, it took you X amount of years, however many years, to have the knowledge you have today. They are going through this process for the first time. So they're not going to remember the majority of what you say. They're not going to remember the majority of what they read and what you're sending them. You are going to have to repeat yourself. You're going to have to kind of schedule that inner conversations with them to allow yourself to repeat yourself so
Mhm.
that they retain it.
Right.
It's just to be fair to the claimant, to be fair to the insured. But I would see adjusters who get frustrated, like, oh, I sent them that letter. Like, why didn't they just read that letter?
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, tell me the last piece of mail that you read. Because
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
got mail too, and you're probably glancing like, not an outstanding bill. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
I'll
bill, bill, bill. Send money, send money, send money. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And I know that we specifically talked about this last episode, but again, I want to bring out, and this is something I'm very, very passionate about, especially when we're talking about reservation of rights letters and letters of declination or coverage declination letters, is that we've got to use real language in between all of the jargon. Because I had specifically mentioned when I was in the ER, the doctor came in and said, "Oh, yeah, we think you have a pulmonary edema." And I'm like, "Okay, pulmonary's, lungs. Edema, is that like the bruise? What's and then she said, water on or fluid in the lungs. And had she come out and just said, we think you have fluid in the lungs or pulmonary edema, as we call it in the medical field, that would have been better than me being all writhing in pain, on a gurney in the hospital and them telling me oh, you've got pulmonary edema. Okay, great. I've got something with my lungs. And I only know pulmonary because I did a lot of bodily injury claims. Okay. So if I was just a strictly property damage claim, I might not know pulmonary.
Mhm.
So use real language in between all of our jargon.
Yeah. Simple language and no acronyms.
Yeah,
No
oh
acronyms.
gosh, no, no. If you do use an acronym, you've got to define it first. You have replacement cost value policy, parentheses, RCV, end of
Mhm.
parentheses. You have actual cash value on your policy, parentheses, ACV, end of parentheses. And then I guess you could go ahead and continue to say ACV, RCV, SOB,
Mhm.
LMNOP, all of that sort of thing. But yes, you do need to make sure that you are defining all of these sorts of things.
Yeah. And I think that's good in a letter, but definitely like on the phone, like I always tell my adjusters, no acronyms on the phone.
Yeah,
Because even if you tell it to them, they're going to confuse it because they're not using it 8 hours a day like you are. So
right.
if you say, RCV, they're going to say, "Oh, that VCR. How much
Yeah,
is the VCR?" Like they're gonna they're gonna
right.
switch the letters around because they're not used to. And then when they call somebody else, they're going to be like, "What are you talking about, VCR?" So
Yeah.
it's just on the phone, just no acronyms because it's just confusing for the claimants.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. One of the things that I do or I did tend to say when I was talking to the insured is, listen, I might slip into insurance ease.
Mhm.
Please stop me. I don't mean to.
Oh,
I
I
will
like
I
that.
will try to remember to translate everything, but every once in a while I know that I will do it. Just stop me, interrupt me so that I can explain it. Okay. I don't want you to have any questions. And if anything, get the letter, read it, call me back. We're leaving the door open for them to make sure they have no questions. I guarantee you, all of this time that you are spending on the front end having these 15, 20, 30-minute conversations per claim, and you've got 150, 200 claims. I get it. I totally get it. It's a lot. I know, but it is going to save you so much time in complaints, return phone calls, emails, all of that kind of lawsuits, all of that
Mhm.
kind of fun jazz. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that as a practice, right? Because we're all human, and even if we
Yes.
try, we might slip up. So it lets them know if I start to say something and it doesn't make sense, or you can't remember, or you feel like I haven't explained this before, stop me so I can make sure I address it.
Right. Right. Well, I think we have probably gotten over like all of that kind of stuff. So essentially, shut up. It's not personal. Send a letter.
Yeah.
Break things up into chunks. And yeah, we said follow up in writing. Okay.
Yes. And then for if anybody's listening and they're in a leadership capacity, train your adjusters, train
Train
your
your
adjusters with
adjusters.
scenarios. Yeah.
Yes.
Their first lesson shouldn't be an actual call with a claimant. It's
No.
not fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yes. And it can be a lot of fun just having even if you get your team leaders with their little pod of people. It doesn't have to be the whole claims department, just 5 people, and having that conversation like, how can we say it better? What's
Mhm.
another way we can say this? How do we break this down? It is going to be so very helpful.
Yeah.
So very helpful. What is also going to be helpful, and this is again, actually based off of your idea or one of your TikToks that I saw, is the next episode. And we're going to be talking about something that adjusters we don't necessarily think about a lot, but it's about bankruptcy, insolvency, and reserves. And if anything, we always hear as adjusters, oh, you got to set right reserve so, the insurance company will be profitable, blah, blah, blah. Well, that doesn't mean anything to us. We don't care. We're just like, dude, as long as you keep paying us our paychecks, that's all we really care about. But, you were explaining something that, again, I've been doing this for like 25 years. I understood it intellectually, but you were able to break it down. And I love this to go like, oh my God, that's what it is. Oh, wow. And it was absolutely fabulous. So don't miss our next episode, number 74, where we're going to be talking about bankruptcy, insolvency, how they're different, and how reserves that the adjuster puts in uh, plays into all of this. So that show will air on July 31st. So um, anyway, thank you, Sandy, for this great idea how to have these tough conversations basically shut up.
Oh yeah, yeah. That it was a it was a pleasure. And anything we can do to make it a little bit easier for new adjusters who are in the field, who are feeling frustrated, who just to let you know, it's not just you. Every adjuster goes through this. You're always going to have tough conversations as part of the job, but confidence comes from doing.
Yes.
So the more you have it, the more secure you'll feel in engaging with claimants, even if they're upset.
Yeah. So great. Well, thank you again. We will see you in 2 weeks.
You're welcome. See you soon.
Thanks for
Bye.
joining us on the Art of Adjusting podcast, where we talk about life as an insurance adjuster.
If you enjoyed this podcast or this episode, please give us 5 stars and a review. It does help the algorithm pick us up.
Hit that subscribe button real quick and tell all of your adjuster friends to check this out as well. For independent adjusting services, go to www.auten.claims. And for anyone interested in working as an independent liability adjuster, go to the Contact Us tab to join our roster.
In the meantime, you can contact me at theartofadjusting.com for consulting and training purposes.